The Umbrella Academy has been something that I have thoroughly enjoyed on Netflix. It's got everything from a great storyline, great plot twists, suspense, character development, and the overall acting has been great. The visual and cinematography has been absolutely brilliant, and the entertainment. It's just hooked me throughout all of the seasons. Did Netflix stay consistent and deliver in this final season of The Umbrella Academy? With a new timeline comes a new threat. The famous family of the Umbrella Academy is back once again, making their attempts to save the world for a final time with season 4 of the Netflix series. In a new timeline, our family of superheroes from the Umbrella Academy are trying to find their place in society and attempting to live ordinary lives. Thinking that they have been able to find some peace in a timeline and no longer need to worry about the threat of an apocalypse, the Umbrella Academy are drawn back together, putting aside their differences to save the world once more. Ordinary people in society are in the knowing behind the changes to the timeline that we had seen from the previous seasons, and a cult has formed, uniting them towards the execution of the cleanse. The Umbrella Academy need to uncover the secret behind the cleanse, but our superheroes find themselves being separated, pushing to work their way back to each other. With this being the final season ever for the Umbrella Academy, this season is supposed to play a vital role in bringing the story to a close. The season does add something new to it, a new type of look and feel. We see new problems, suspense, plot twists, but is it enough? We're getting 6 episodes that make up season 4, that are roughly made up of about 50 minutes in length. Now, the plot and storyline for the show felt like it was lacking, and I think when it gets to around about episode 3, it sort of starts to drag until you get to the final episode, and then it sort of starts to come together. Apart from a plot twist that happens revolving around Ben as number 6, it feels like more of the same. But at the same time, it feels like they're trying to do something slightly different here, which felt to me very similar to The Boys, because we get a little bit more gruesome in this season. Now, coming off the back of season 3, in this season 4 we're transported 6 years into the future. All of our Umbrella Academy children have lost their powers because they prevented the Marigold from being shared by Sir Reginald Hargreaves. Now, with that being said, the character sort of portrayal here comes across very differently to what we would usually expect. All of the children are trying to find their place within society. Luther, as number 1, is a stripper. Diego, as number 2, has settled down with Layla, and they've had children and a family, and Diego is a postman who obviously just doesn't like his job. Alison, as number 3, is trying to pick up from where she left off with her acting career without using her powers. She's living with her daughter and is trying to balance the fact that she's kicking off or attempting to kick off her acting career once again without cheating this time. And she's also looking after Klaus as number 4. And when it comes to number 4, it's quite interesting because his power gave him a mindset to not worry about death or anything associated with it. Whereas now we're seeing a polar opposite effect on Klaus, being that he's literally scared of everything. Number 5, interestingly enough, has followed a similar suit from how he was in previous seasons gone by, but this time he's working for a different institution, which is the CIA. Ben, as number 6, has been arrested and is being held in prison because he has made illegal crypto trades. And finally, we've got Victor, who's number 7, trying to find himself whilst living in Canada, but has picked up a little bit of a reputation as a bit of a player. Now, in this timeline that we're brought into, there's a significant difference, yes, in the fact that our characters no longer have powers, but it does just feel like Netflix have missed a trick. And I know I always say it, but it has given me that Game of Thrones vibe in terms of the season ending, which is a bit of a disappointment. Now, in this timeline that we're brought into, there is a specific difference. Now, our characters have gone through a bit of a change. I mean, a bit of a change is a bit of an understatement because they've lost their powers. And in this timeline, interestingly enough, the Marigold wasn't shared by Sir Reginald Hargreaves. And it's interesting to see those characters trying to find their place within society and what changes occur and affect their personalities and ultimately their portrayal to us. But the challenge that they're faced in this season is called the Cleanse. And this all revolves around Ben, number 6, and his relationship with a new character called Jennifer. And the two of them coming together set things in motion towards a cataclysmic event, bringing about another apocalypse. What is good about this season, though, is that we as the audience and various fans are finally brought into the fold as to what really happened with Ben and why these apocalypses keep happening. And it's all to do with Sir Reginald Hargreaves kicking everything off with the fact that he released the Marigold, which created superhumans and his superhuman family in the Umbrella Academy, setting up a multitude of different timelines that ultimately bring about the end of the world in every single one of those timelines. For me, this season starts off well, then by the middle period it starts to dip off and drag out and then recovers towards the ending where we're concluding things for the overall show. And it feels a little bit like we're taken on a journey in this season that's a little bit strange, because for me it felt as if Netflix were trying to deviate off their usual path, which has actually brought tremendous success when we think of season 1, 2 and 3. And by deviating off, I mean that I've just come off the back of reviewing season 4 of The Boys, and instantly in a few scenes I felt very strongly that there were similarities when they took it that next level, making things a little bit more gruesome in this season. Nice touch, yes, but add that in if you're going to keep true to what this show stands for in terms of the story arc and how it develops and what gives Umbrella Academy that status and makes the show so great. Now, when it comes to plot holes, I really had to think about this because I wasn't 100% sure myself. But when I rewatched it, I then came to realise that there was one little bit of a standout. And it's to do with Reginald and Abigail Hargreaves not being on the same page. Now, when it comes to this couple, they are fierce lovers from the same alien race that have fought their way back to each other. And surely, in doing so, a relationship as strong as that one surely would talk to one another, especially when it comes to what's right and wrong. On one side of things, you've got Reginald, and he doesn't want the same destruction that came about to his world to come to Earth. And on the other side of the coin, you've got Abigail, who wants to restore the balance based on Reginald's actions when he released the Marigold, creating the superhumans, which then set about a number of timelines that all have the same outcome in bringing about an apocalypse. In the last episode of the season, we see the two come together and finally talk and get on the same page as to what their motives were behind their actions. And from all of this, I can't help but think that if they'd just talked in the beginning, which surely they would have done, then none of this would have ended up happening. I mean, it might have done, but there's a strong possibility that none of it would have happened at all. When it comes to inconsistencies, I really, really disliked what they did with Luther being so out of character in this season. Now, after losing his power, Luther takes a path in society of being a stripper. He then regains his power like all of his siblings, but before and after, he comes across so over enthusiastic about everything, and it's completely different to what we've seen over the course of the previous seasons in him being that dominant figure, the leader, the reason that they call him number one. And even at the end, it still doesn't change. There might be flickers where he does resort back to his original character portrayal, but overall it stayed pretty consistent, being out of character from everything that was built in the previous 3 seasons. For me personally, I thought this was a bit of a letdown, if I'm honest. I mean, I'm used to seeing a Luther, a number 1 that is a strong leader, give or take, but personality-wise, he fits the bill. Now for me, when it comes to the lingering questions, I've narrowed it down to 3. What do Reginald and Abigail Hargreaves really look like? If the Umbrella Academy children cease to exist, then how do their children survive in the conclusion of the season? And why, in every single timeline that was created, is there an apocalypse at the end of it? Now this season stars Tom Hopper as Luther Hargreaves, our number 1, David Castaneda as Diego Hargreaves, our number 2, Emmy Raver-Lapman as Alison Hargreaves, our number 3, Robert Sheehan as Klaus Hargreaves, our number 4, Adrian Gallagher as number 5, Justin Min as Ben Hargreaves, our number 6, Elliot Page as Victor Hargreaves, our number 7, Ritu Arya as Layla Pitts, Colm Feore as Sir Reginald Hargreaves, Lisa Repo Martel as Abigail Hargreaves, Nick Offerman as Jean with a G, Megan Mullally as Jean with a J. Once you watch this, you'll understand why I've just done that. And David Cross as Cy Grossman. As always, we need our choices for the ones to watch. And the ones to watch for me, Luther, Diego, Alison, Klaus, number 5, Ben, and Victor. Now, who is the one to watch out of the ones to watch? For me, I found this to be a really, really tough decision. It's split between 2, and both characters are my favourite. Seeing as it's the final season ever of the Umbrella Academy, I'm going to give it to 2 this time. Number 5 and Klaus. Now let's start with number 5. The reason I've given it to number 5 is because I have thought that the acting from this actor has been absolutely brilliant. Season over season, he has been very, very consistent. And I always thought that it must be difficult, job or not, for someone so young to have to play a role that has to portray someone in their 60s. I mean, I think he did a phenomenal job, and he did stay consistent in this season. And what I did like also is the slight difference that he has aged a little bit. So he has to change his game up a little bit. And I really, really thought that he's been amazing throughout. And ultimately, it's made it even more of an enjoying watch. Klaus. Now, I have really enjoyed this actor's work because he's brought the funny element into the equation for the Umbrella Academy. And every single time I see him in this role, he's been so funny, and I've really, really loved it because it's added humour into this equation. Now, when it comes to the character development in this season, we do get an interesting take on things, and that development is away from what we usually would associate with, and what I'm calling opposite syndrome. Now let's start with Luther. The inconsistency with this character plays a part in what I'm about to say, and the change in this character is a bit of a weird one. Now, as I've previously mentioned, in this timeline, in this season, Luther is overly enthusiastic throughout this whole season. In one instance, he's going along to pick up Ben, who's coming out of jail, and the over-enthusiasm, the portrayal change in him being over-enthusiastic, and I'm sitting there watching this thinking, hang on a minute, that seems a bit out of character, it doesn't really make sense from what we've seen previously. It's not like they've built over the course of one season. Season 1, 2 and 3, he's pretty much stayed the same. He might have explored his character arc, but we've not really seen him go a completely opposite way. What's interesting is when we come to the final episode, we sort of see him attempt to break that new portrayal in this season. And then all of a sudden he's reverted straight back to him being over-enthusiastic and a little bit silly. And this ultimately is just carried on throughout every episode in this season. And for me personally, I think it came across a little bit odd. Now with Diego, our number 2, we get a positive character arc coupled with what is to be expected from this. Now we find ourselves with Diego now having a family. He's settled down with Layla and he's had kids, and what provides a bit of a funny element is the fact that he's got a 9-to-5 job as a postman and he hates it. There is opposite syndrome in this. We see him throwing newspapers and he misses every single shot, to the point where we see him pick up the phone to his manager and we're hearing his manager have a go at him because he's so bad at his job. What is good to see is a sense of realism that is centered around Diego, which is that he is grappling with the fact that he doesn't want to be ordinary. And that is so realistic and believable, because we also see that in his portrayal coming across, for me personally, as if he's lost himself a bit. And in losing himself, he's also lost his sense of purpose. Now, he does continue along this path, being motivated by his family, but he does show multiple attempts at trying to join number 5 at the CIA. What is really good to see from this portrayal is that it is sort of expected. When we see Diego in this scenario, it is very believable that he would struggle when it comes to having to try to fit in with ordinary society, because he's going from one end of the extreme all the way to the other. And what's a nice sort of ending to this is that Diego finally does come to accept that he is a family man, and the most important thing to him is his family, his brothers and sisters and his wife and kids now. Alison, as number 3, as to be expected, has picked up right where we left off in season 3. For 6 years, she's been holding on to the guilt that she had gone behind her siblings' back in season 3 and is feeling very awkward in terms of having that contact and closeness that she's always had with her siblings and keeping them at arm's length apart from one. And what she's done is latch on to one of her brothers, Klaus, who she has allowed to live with her and hasn't turned her back on him. Now with this, I do think it is kind of cool because we get to see a new character relationship dynamic. We haven't really seen Klaus and Alison come together before, and I do like that they've introduced that new relationship and allowed us as the audience to explore that in the final season. Now, the conflict for Alison in this season, or in the beginning of this season at least, is that because of what she did in season 3, she's the cause of her own distancing with her family. Her family come across as if they are fairly open to her coming back and wanting to have that connection, but slowly. There's a birthday party for Diego's children, and in the beginning she wasn't going to come, but then we see her turn up, and expected, it is awkward, but soon after there is a moment where all the siblings have an opportunity to lay all their cards out on the table, any issues of the sort, and it is put to bed in the end. Funnily enough, no one actually pipes up, they leave it, but that sort of clears the air. Was it under-delivered? Potentially, because as a sibling, if someone did that to you, you would definitely be annoyed. I mean, you'd have something to say, but none of them do. Either way, it's resolved, which is good, but at the same time, I think there could have been more said at the time. What I do like about Alison and her portrayal in this season is that there's a clear continuation from what had happened in season 3 into season 4, even 6 years after. And then not only that, they've added Klaus into a relationship dynamic that we haven't yet explored and developed that further. Now, when it comes to Klaus as our number 4, he has opposite syndrome at its finest. Before losing his power, we know that Klaus has constantly attempted to kill himself, whether by drugs or alcohol. He has done almost everything and is not afraid of death. The interesting thing here in this season is that after losing his power, he is so scared of dying, it is off the Richter scale. The portrayal from him is that absolutely everything he is worried about. In one scene, we see Alison not able to go and pick up her daughter Claire, and rings Klaus to go and pick her up and take her home. He's got to a crossing and he is so scared of crossing the road that he is so far back, and he is then teaching that to Claire, who thinks he's crazy and overprotective. But it's so interesting, absolutely everything. There was a glass shattered in this episode, and he even pointed that out to Claire to be very careful. It's a crazy portrayal change. He also refuses to retake the Marigold with all of his siblings once they finally then want their powers back. And there's a moment where he actually dies from getting a gunshot wound, and Alison pours the Marigold into his gunshot wound, and when he awakes, he is livid. He cannot believe that she's done that. Even though she's saved his life, he is pissed off with her because he knows that he's then going to resort back to a high intake of drugs, alcohol, you name it. And for me, I really did like this portrayal. I thought it was excellent to see, because it's interesting that throughout the course of all the seasons that we've seen, his portrayal is always that is very free as a personality. And in this season, he executes that portrayal of the opposite syndrome in such a great way, and it makes it that much more entertaining to watch. Now, number 5 has been my most favourite of characters, and I felt a little bit let down with this character portrayal because it just felt like more of the same. We see a continuation in this season with number 5 having to grapple with time. This time, when he's grappling with time, his power, once he regains it, is a little bit off, and every time he uses it is brought to a subway system. That subway system, each destination holds a different point in time. At one point in the story, number 5 and Layla think they know how to figure out the subway system, which has an opposite effect and actually sees them stuck in a timeline for a number of years and almost giving up all hope of trying to get back to their family in the timeline that they found themselves in originally. Until number 5 finds a book that holds the secret that he actually created at some point in time, I don't know, but holds that secret to get back to his time that he recognises, and they're able to find a way back to that present. But because of his relationship with Layla that he's formed when he thought that he was lost for good, he ends up returning to the present day, with Diego finding out about their romance, and because Layla picks Diego, he ends up running off, wanting to lose himself in time, where he actually comes across a diner with multiple number 5s who have also found themselves lost in that time. And in that moment, he has shared the ultimate truth. And that ultimate truth is that none of those siblings, including number 5, can remain alive. They are the reason that the multitude of timelines have been created, and every single one of those timelines has an apocalyptic ending. Now, I do like this because it is something a little bit new, but at the same time, it's more of the same, which makes it a little bit disappointing for me, because I would have thought that we could have found a little bit more of a creative way when we think about number 5 and the story that he could have been on in this final season. So it's a bit of a balancing act, because at the same time I understand why they had to do this, because he needed to find out the truth, or at least the siblings in their entirety needed to find out the truth. And that was probably the best way that they could find out that truth. Ben Hargreaves as number 6 is completely loved up in this season, as well as bringing us into the fold as to what actually happened, the secret behind his death. Throughout the entire story of the Umbrella Academy, we've never been brought into the fold when it comes to Ben's mysterious death. Ben and our new character Jennifer are naturally drawn to one another. We understand that the reason behind this is that Abigail Hargreaves had created something that was the reason behind needing to kill both Ben and Jennifer to stop them bringing about the apocalypse. And this is consistent throughout every one of the timelines that you could possibly imagine in this whole story. The Marigold that Reginald Hargreaves released all those years ago causes Ben and Jennifer to one day inevitably evolve into something horrific. And in this timeline, they've labelled it as the cleanse. In a moment where we think that all is lost and Ben is not Ben anymore, Victor, in an attempt to save him, touches Ben, and Ben shares a glimpse into what life should be like in one timeline and not multiple. And when it comes to Ben and his portrayal, I did think that this was a good addition, but I just can't help think that it wasn't enough. It's the same old story told in a different type of way. It's another apocalypse happening. Yes, it's involving one of the Umbrella Academy members. And yes, they are bringing us into the fold of Ben's death. But I can't help think that either the storyline or its delivery just needed to be better. Now, Victor, as our number 7, is trying to repay Ben for bringing him back. Victor, in the beginning of the season, is trying to find himself, and in doing so he comes on leaps and bounds in terms of his development and finally sort of settling in terms of knowing who he actually is. Now in season 2, Victor is brought back from a potential apocalyptic destruction of the world yet again, being saved by Ben. And Victor, throughout the course of this season, has made it his personal responsibility in repaying that debt and making sure that he can save Ben. Now, Victor never gives up until the very end, and Ben pushes as hard as he possibly can when that touch is enabled and gives Victor a glimpse into what needs to happen in order to save the world, which is then further verified by number 5 once he returns. Now, I thought the portrayal was an honourable one from Victor, but I can't help think that Victor doesn't really play any major role in this season, which is a bit of a disappointing one. And when it comes to the visuals, I thought there were a few new elements that were recognisable and did actually stand out to me. A new season and a new timeline comes a new look and feel. I thought the flashbacks that were integrated into this gave a good distinction and made that transition quite effective and ultimately made it more enjoyable to watch. It made me start to think of The Flash or Arrow in terms of how they do their integration when they interlock a flashback, and it really did have a good effect. We get new colours introduced for the powers and the timelines. Victor going from white to orange, and then Allison going from waves when she uses her powers, showing a distinction in the imagery, to a yellowy colour coming out in her eyes. And number 5, when he uses his power to sort of blip from a blue into a purple. And then it definitely gets more gruesome. Almost a guts galore type of approach. And it's very, very similar to The Boys. And to be clear, when I say it's similar to The Boys, I mean in certain aspects. There are a couple of scenes that stand out to me when I'm watching it, and I instantly thought, oh, hang on a minute, that is very similar to The Boys. But obviously The Boys are on a completely different Richter scale. Now, I do like what they've done here, I really do, but at the same time I just can't help think that they're trying to be something that they're not. Instead of keeping to the path that made them successful, they've almost deviated off of it, trying to be something that they're not. The gruesome element, yes, they had some elements that were quite vicious in previous seasons gone by, but they've never really gone to that level of gruesome that we've seen in this new season. Sort of stands out to me as a little bit of a copying act to The Boys. And when it comes to the cinematography, like previous seasons gone by, they have stayed pretty consistent, which is great for the viewing experience. Close-ups, two-person side shots, blurring in and out, and the use of light and dark mood lighting. Now, zooming in on the close-ups, the reason I really like how they've used them in the Umbrella Academy show is it provides character expression and emotion, which ultimately brings you closer to the characters. The use of two-person side shots enables those low angles to illustrate dominance, while the high angles and shots help to illustrate vulnerability. The blur in and out type of shot really helps to emphasize the viewer's attention in the given moment, to add that little bit of extra layer of suspense, and it helps guide the narrative by indicating what's important in that specific moment. That use of light and dark mood lighting helps bring the audience on the journey and links the type of emotion that we should be feeling when we're brought along on that story arc. I did really like what they've done here with the cinematography, and in combination with the visuals, it made it a really good look and feel when experiencing the watching of this show. When it comes to the entertainment value, I really do think there's a bit of an imbalance here. There are some good bits, there are some bad bits. I think the bad is probably outweighing the good, if I'm completely honest. And for me, it pains me to say it, but I think this is probably the worst season in comparison to all of the seasons of the Umbrella Academy. I mean, I did enjoy it, but it did drag in the middle, and I just feel that it didn't compare on any level to any of the previous seasons that we've seen. And the reasoning behind that is that it just feels like more of the same. A new timeline, a new apocalypse, a new set of plot twists, but the essence is the same, which makes it feel like more of the same. We are provided with clarity in a few elements throughout the course of this show. We get the clarity on Ben. We're brought into the understanding of what needs to happen with regards to the Umbrella Academy. I just think that maybe because of the fact that they tried to deviate away and overthink this, that they have let themselves down here. Now, I didn't think it was terrible, but I definitely think that when comparing it to all 4 seasons of the Umbrella Academy, this is definitely the worst. Overall, I found season 4 of the Umbrella Academy to be somewhat unbalanced. The pros being outweighed by the cons. I thought the storyline felt a bit more of the same. We're not really getting anything majorly different. I mean, we're getting plot twists again, we're getting a new apocalypse, we're getting a new timeline, but it's just more of the same, and them deviating away to try and be something that they're not in copying the boys just has set them down a path that they could have avoided and maybe put more effort into focusing on what has made this show so incredibly successful in the past. When it comes to the character development, I really do like that opposite syndrome that they've introduced. It gives a bit of a new, freshened look to the overall show, which plays a good part in this. When it comes to the visual and cinematography element, I thought they were very consistent. I thought they actually did a very good job, which ultimately had a very good viewing experience from my point of view. But when it comes to that entertainment value, I just think it definitely ranks the lowest season when comparing it to all the other seasons of the Umbrella Academy. I give season 4 of the Umbrella Academy a 2.5 out of 5 buckets, meaning it's a binge watching 50-50. If you were to have a superpower, which superpower would you want? For me personally, I'd have teleportation. But let me know which superpower you would have down in the comments below. As always, don't forget to smash a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and follow us on all social media to stay up to date with the latest content. If you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more. I'm Matthew, this is Binge Watcher. Thanks for binging with me.